There's been another deadly shooting by ICE agents. You know, I'm hearing this is an issue of training, and I agree. Toilet training. ICE is going out of their way to recruit victims of child abuse who need to be given help, not a badge or a gun. The mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Fry, telling reporters, quote, "I just saw a video of more than 6 masked agents pummeling one of our constituents and shooting him to death. How many more residents, how many more Americans need to die or get badly hurt for this operation to end?" The Associated Press reporting the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, that would be the state police, is now investigating Saturday's shooting. But you might remember after the shooting of Renee Good, they began investigating until Kristi Noem muscled them out of the way, saying they lacked jurisdiction. The BBC reporting that Noem said ICE agents on Saturday morning fired defensive shots when the victim began to react violently. Governor Tim Walz calling Kristi Noem's account of events, quote, nonsense and lies. Donald Trump accusing Governor Walz of attempting to incite an insurrection. Walz telling the FBI and ICE to leave Minnesota and allow authorities to conduct this investigation. You've all seen the videos. I'm not playing them on this show. Democratic Senator Patty Murray of Washington State, after watching the videos, said, quote, "This looks like an execution." What we know so far is a 37-year-old ICU nurse who worked at the local veterans hospital was gunned down by masked ICE agents sometime after 9 a.m. Minnesota time on Saturday. Senator Patty Murray telling reporters, quote, "The president is escalating the situation, and I have no faith that he will stop." So we have some breaking news suggesting this recent shooting will result in a government shutdown. As you know, the 2026 budget was supposed to kick in October 1st, 2025. There was a government shutdown. It reopened after Congress agreed to a continuing resolution that keeps the government open until next Friday. Earlier this week, the House passed the Department of Homeland Security funding bill. It passed 220 to 207. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries told his congressional caucus, told the Democrats to vote against the bill. He said, we need to come up with another spending package that reins in ICE. But 7 Democrats voted for the bill. They are all in purple districts. Had they voted against the funding bill, it would have been defeated. It now heads to the Senate, where it needs 60 votes. I'm going to talk about this in detail later on in the show. Jake Sherman of Punchbowl with late news Saturday night that Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, is voting against this bill, essentially calling this ICE spending package a license to murder. Chuck Schumer telling Senate Democrats not to vote for this spending bill. Schumer said what's happening in Minnesota is appalling. That's why he's voting no. He said Democrats in the Senate will not provide the votes to proceed. What we're beginning to see right now is a shift among moderate Senate Democrats who usually side with this current administration on border issues, but now it looks like they're about to vote against ICE. Politico reported that around 40 House Democrats last year voted for the Laken Riley Act, which pretty much gave ICE carte blanche to arrest any immigrant who's ever been charged with the crime. I'm going to talk about that later on in the show. Laken Riley Act, last year, passed. 40 Democrats voted in favor of it in the House. So Laken Riley gives ICE permission to arrest and deport Anybody who has ever been accused of a crime, not convicted, not arrested, just charged. Again, 40 House Democrats voted for that bill. So when you look around and see what's going on, an argument could be made that ICE is not a lawless agency. They've been given permission by Brett Kavanaugh of the Supreme Court to round up people based on their ethnicity, and the Lake and Riley Act gives them permission to arrest and deport anyone who has ever been accused, any immigrant who has ever been accused of a crime. So they may not be a lawless agency after all, okay? But there's been a shift now inside the Democratic Party. 40 House Democrats last year voted for Lake and Riley. Earlier this week, only 7 voted to fund ICE with no restrictions. Only 7 Democrats said they're in favor of giving ICE what they need with no restriction. So this is being described right now on Capitol Hill as the collapse of the moderate firewall. Nevada's Democratic Senator Cortez Masto describes herself as pragmatic when it comes to border issues because she represents Nevada, which has 2 Democratic senators, but Nevada went for Trump in 2024, the first time a Republican presidential candidate won Nevada in 20 years. So Senator Masto is very much aware of the politics when it comes to immigration and the shooting we had Saturday morning in Minneapolis. Before that shooting, she was seen as one of the moderates who would vote to fund ICE next week with no restrictions. She is now a hard no, telling reporters the Trump administration is undertrained. They're combative agents who are walking the streets of Minneapolis, oppressing Americans. That's not moderate talk coming from a moderate Democrat. Jackie Rosen is the other Democratic senator from Nevada. She was reelected in 2024 despite Kamala Harris going down to defeat in that state. Senator Rosen, because of her constituents, Nevada, she has to straddle issues like the border and present herself as a moderate. Well, in November, she voted to end the government shutdown. Remember, there was a government shutdown because we didn't have a budget on October 1st. The government was shut down, and then in November, they voted to reopen it, and she was one of the moderate Democrats who voted to reopen it, and so was Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. He was Hillary Clinton's running mate in 2016. He's a moderate who voted to end the government shutdown in November, Democrat. But now both Democrats say they will not vote to fund the Department of Homeland Security next week unless there are restraints on ICE. Senator Rosen says she has a responsibility to hold Donald Trump accountable for abuses of power. Senator Tim Kaine saying he's voting against the funding bill because voting for it would validate a president acting chaotically and unlawfully. So everything is politics. There was a tragedy in Minneapolis. Everything is politics. So this is where it stands late Saturday night. We are now looking at a government shutdown for one reason: Saturday morning shooting of Alex Jeffrey Pretty. Because of moderate Democrats defecting, the math is no longer there for this spending package to get through the Senate. Remember, you need 60 votes in the Senate to pass a spending bill. That's according to Senate rules. This type of bill is not subject to reconciliation. Those are rules. It's not in the Constitution, and it's not a law. These are Senate rules. And the Republicans who control the Senate, Thune is free to change the rules. I don't think he is. As it stands right now, Republicans need 60 votes to pass this funding bill. Republicans need 7 to 8 Democrats. And then there's Republican Rand Paul, who didn't vote to open the government back in November. So nobody knows if he's going to vote for the spending package. The Democrats seem to be willing right now, as of Saturday night, they seem to be willing to make a stand. But here's the problem. One big beautiful bill was signed into law on July 4th of last year. That was a supplemental, and contained within that supplemental bill was $170 billion over the next 4 years for border enforcement. $170 billion. From that, ICE is hiring 10 to 12,000 new agents. They're doubling the beds in the for-profit detention centers. All of that is coming out of one big, beautiful bill passed on July 4th. That was Donald Trump's signature piece of legislation, and it was a supplemental, meaning there is a budget which has to be passed on October 1st of each year, and then a supplemental is additional spending. So this was a supplemental. So they already got ICE already has $170 billion over the next 4 years. They are now the most heavily funded federal agency, police force in our government. I think ICE gets more than the FBI, the ATF, and a couple of other agencies combined. I mean, the DEA, it's just ICE. Donald Trump is turning ICE into his own palace guard, and they have unlimited resources. And thanks to Laken Riley and Brett Kavanaugh, no restraint. Again, the more I read, the more I realize they're not a lawless agency. I read these Supreme Court rulings. I read the appellate court rulings. I read the Laken Riley Act. Unfortunately, they're not as lawless as we want to believe. Don't flatter yourself. We should have been stopping those 40 Democrats from voting for Laken Riley back in July. The Democrats did do a good job on one big, beautiful bill. J.D. Vance had to come in and break the tie. So you can't blame Chuck Schumer for one big, beautiful bill. You can't blame the Democrats for this $170 billion fire hose of money going to ICE because the Democrats said no. And Rand Paul. Okay, unless things change, we are looking at a government shutdown this Friday. The Senate has to vote on the Department of Homeland Security funding bill next week. If it doesn't pass, we don't have a budget. ICE is part of the Department of Homeland Security, so this is the funding bill. If the Senate can't pass this funding bill, there's no pathway to the government staying open. Now, here's the problem. Trump wants the government shut down. He's itching to invoke the Insurrection Act, and this will give him yet another excuse to claim, I need to send in the National Guard. I need to send in the troops to restore order. Remember, Congress remains open for business during a government shutdown. But Trump and Russell Vought, his OMB, head of Office of Management and Budget, they have plans for a government shutdown. They know exactly Project 2025, which Russell Vought, he wrote some of the chapters. They know what to do during a government shutdown, which is fund all the things they want and defund all the things they hate. They're prepared for a government shutdown, and if they can put it on the feet of the Democrats, they will keep this government shut down. Because he is looking for two things. He's looking for any excuse to grab more power. And you know, as I just said, Project 2025 has some plan to use a government shutdown to centralize even more authority in the executive branch. This is not about Alex Petrie, who was gunned down on Saturday. This is about politics. I will talk about Alex Petrie, talk about him in a few minutes. This is politics. How will shutting the government down play in the midterms? And of course, if the government is shut down, what tools does Trump think he has at his disposal to keep the government shut down throughout the midterms? The midterms are shaping up to be a bloodbath for Republicans. The polling suggests the Senate, which nobody thought was in play, is now in play. So if we shut this government down, which Republicans, that's why they come to Washington, to destroy the government. If we shut this government down on Friday, how many Republicans on Capitol Hill will think, you know what? Keep it shut down. Postpone the midterms. I don't want to lose. If you can figure out, I'm looking at my polling, I'm going to lose. So I'm not going to say boo if Donald Trump figures out a way to postpone the midterms. Here's the latest on the deadly shooting of a Minnesota man killed by ICE agents Saturday morning on the streets of Minneapolis. The Associated Press is reporting the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, that would be the state FBI to make it simple. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension is investigating the shooting, but you might remember after the shooting of Renee Good, they began investigating until federal officials muscled them out of the way. ICE agents reportedly fired at least 10 shots over a period of 5 seconds into Alex Jeffrey Pretty, a registered nurse, an ICU nurse at the VA. Julie Bosman from the New York Times reporting Pretty was a nurse in the intensive care unit at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Minneapolis. The Times reporting the Minneapolis police chief saying they believe 2 ICE agents did the shooting. Border Commander Gregory Bovino, who was running ICE operations in Minneapolis, held a press conference after Saturday's shooting, telling reporters the agents who fired the shot, one agent who fired the shot had been with the agency for 8 years. At the time when he was speaking, they thought it was 1 agent. Now they believe it's 2. The story will change. Bovino said the victim, Pretty, was the aggressor, and, quote, this is only the latest attack on law enforcement. Greg Bovino said, quote, this looks like a situation where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. I'm not going to play you the videos because you've all seen them and it's disturbing. Greg Bovino, you saw the videos. Do you believe it looks like a situation where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement? The man, Pretty, reportedly had in his possession a 9mm gun, which, according to the Minneapolis police chief, he had a license to carry. Greg Bovino, during his press conference, wouldn't say whether Pretty had aimed his gun at an ICE agent. You saw the video. Responding to Bovino's let me go big here. Little tiny man Greg Bovino has been signed by Disney to be the 8th dwarf in the new Snow White movie. He's going to be gassy. He's gassy. Throws tear gas at people. He's Gassy the dwarf. Where was I? Responding to Gregory Bovino's charge that the dead Pretty wanted to do maximum damage and was aiming his gun at ICE agents, Governor Walz told the press, "Thank God we have video," unquote. Stephen Miller, Trump's deputy chief of staff, immediately accused the gunshot victim, the murder victim, of trying to kill border agents. Miller said a would-be assassin tried to murder federal law enforcement, and the official Democrat account sides with the terrorists. This is propaganda straight out of Nazi Germany. This is just straight out of Nazi Germany. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has activated the National Guard to assist police and federal agents protecting the Whipple Building in downtown Minneapolis. The Whipple Building is an ICE staging area, and it's the scene of many protests, and it's where ICE detains people. U.S. citizens are detained at the Whipple Building. The Washington Post reporting that the governor will bill the federal government for the costs associated with deploying Minnesota's National Guard. Minneapolis police identify the victim as a male, a U.S. citizen, white, 37 years old. He was shot sometime after 9 a.m. on Saturday. Videos of the incident shows at least 5 ICE agents, masked, wrestling him to the ground. Shots fired, roughly 10 or more. And then all of the ICE agents, including the shooters, move away from the victim. Some agents seen cowering behind parked cars. If you want to see cowardice in action, watch how the ICE agents behave after the shooting. This is the worst of the worst. The worst of the worst. The Associated Press reporting that in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, protesters began shouting, "ICE out now." One ICE agent, according to the Associated Press, walked away from the protesters, but mockingly said sarcastically at them, "Boo-hoo." After Pretty was rushed to the hospital and shot to death, an ICE agent said, "Boo-hoo." Homeland Security stated the man had a 9mm gun and was preparing to massacre ICE agents who then acted in self-defense by shooting him. But the New York Times analyzed video taken of the shooting and concluded that Preddy, the victim, was not holding a gun, but was instead holding a cell phone when ICE agents wrestled him to the ground and shot him to death. More than 10 shots in 5 seconds. Preddy reportedly was licensed to carry a firearm. And yes, it appears he did have a firearm on his body, but according to the New York Times, who analyzed the videos, he wasn't brandishing his weapon before or while he was being shot. The New York Times added, open carry is legal in Minnesota. The Minneapolis police chief said the victim had no criminal record. It's legal in Minneapolis to carry a 9mm gun. This is what Republicans gave us. And the minute the police see a gun, they start shooting. A gun, where was it? I mean, I would assume Kash Patel is not going to investigate this. So this is just conjecture. I have a feeling they were wrestling him to the ground. They saw the 9mm gun, and I'll just leave it at that. One protester immediately after the killing was shoved into an unmarked vehicle. The Associated Press reporting that immediately after the shooting, federal agents fired flash grenades and began hitting protesters with their batons. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz immediately issued the following statement. This was right after the shooting, right after he saw the videos. Quote, and I love Governor Tim Walz. I do. It looks like he's not going to be running for president. And he's not running for re-election as governor. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz said, quote, Minnesota has had it. This is sickening. The president must end this operation. Pull the thousands of violent, untrained officers out of Minnesota now. Last week, the FBI issued subpoenas as it launched an investigation into Governor Walz, along with Keith Ellison, Minnesota State Attorney General, and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. They're all being investigated. Department of Justice and Homeland Security accuse these three Democratic leaders of conspiring to impede the work of ICE agents. Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who represents the Somali community targeted by the ICE raids in Minneapolis, telling reporters, quote, about the shooting, this appears to be an execution by immigration enforcement. The Congresswoman's son was recently detained and pulled over by ICE agents. Why? Because he isn't white. Donald Trump, in the past month, has threatened to deport Congresswoman Omar, calling her human garbage. He says she comes from a garbage country, Somalia, that stinks, unquote. Donald Trump immediately blamed local police for the shooting. Trump took to Truth Social and said, quote, where are the local police? Why weren't they allowed to protect ICE officers? Did the mayor and the governor call them off? Yeah, same thing. Like, it's Nancy Pelosi's fault that the Capitol was attacked on January 6th. He said he blames Nancy Pelosi for him not calling in the National Guard. Minnesota Department of Public Safety Commissioner Bob Jacobson appeared with Governor Tim Walz on Saturday and addressed the president's concerns about local enforcement assisting ICE. This is what Bob Jacobson, who's the head of the Department of Public Safety for Minnesota, quote, this is what he said, if there are violent offenders or violent criminals or violent crimes, we will investigate and will bring those to justice. If the federal government would like to work with us, to continue to work with us, as they have in the past, to locate those violent offenders, we are always open to those discussions and are always willing to assist. They were looking into who killed Renee Good. They were muscled out. They're not allowed to investigate the killer of Renee Good. Do you think, well, right now, the state is investigating the killing of Pretty, but let's see what happens by Monday. House Majority Whip Tom Emmer, Republican. He represents parts of Minnesota. He's like the number 3 guy in the House leadership, Republican. He said, and by the way, he's a moderate. He's like one of the good Republicans. House Majority Whip Tom Emmer said in a statement after the murder, quote, the governor, Tim Walz, and local leaders, their rhetoric has empowered criminals and put federal law enforcement's lives at risk. It's dangerous and has made the situation in Minneapolis much worse. We are grateful no Border Patrol officers were harmed. So I was going to do today's show about the rhetoric and how dangerous it is to be an ICE officer. I don't have time. I'm going to probably do that tomorrow. I have some statistics and numbers to go over how dangerous it is to be an ICE officer. Tom Homan, the border czar, keeps talking about having to hand a folded flag to the families of ICE officers who died in service. Now, it's tragic when anybody dies. I don't want anybody hurting an ICE agent. On tomorrow's show or Monday's show, I will go over how dangerous it is to be an ICE agent. Spoiler alert, it's not. It's not dangerous to be an ICE agent. Tom Emmer, the House Majority Whip, added, unlike my Democrat colleagues, I'm going to let law enforcement conduct their investigation and not jump to asinine conclusions, unquote. You're going to let law enforcement conduct an investigation. Well, if the FBI's investigation is anything like their investigation into the shooting of Renee Good, the focus will be less on the shooter and more on why the victim deserved to get killed. That's why you had FBI agents quitting. You had U.S. attorneys quitting after the shooting of Renee Good because the order came down. Don't look into the alleged the shooter, Jonathan Ross, the guy who put 4 holes into Renee Good and then allegedly muttered effing bitch. You have U.S. attorneys quitting and now FBI agents quitting because the order came down. Don't investigate the shooter. Investigate the wife of Renee Good, Becca Good. Find out if she's like with Antifa. This is Nazi Germany stuff. This is propaganda. Don't believe your eyes. This is right out of Joseph Goebbels' diaries. All right. Mary Moriarty is the prosecutor in Hennepin County. That's where this shooting occurred. According to the New York Times, she said she's concerned about the preservation of evidence at the scene. During a press conference on Saturday, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz said, unlike the January 7th killing of Renee Good, where the Department of Homeland Security declared Minnesota has no jurisdiction to investigate and or prosecute, Governor Walz insists he now wants the state of Minnesota, not the FBI, but the state of Minnesota, to take the lead on investigating this killing. Governor Walz said, quote, let state investigators secure justice. As we process the scene, stay peaceful and give them space, but the state has the personnel to keep people safe. Federal agents must not obstruct our ability to do so. Ernesto Londoño of the New York Times reporting the FBI in Minnesota was unable to confirm what role, if any, it will play in the investigation of the shooting. The FBI is not investigating the shooter of Renee Good. The Department of Justice said we are not doing a civil rights investigation into the killing of Renee Good. They said the shooting will be investigated by ICE. Do you know how many ICE officers have been disciplined in the past year? 0. There's an ICE agent named Charles Exum who fired 5 shots into a U.S. citizen in Chicago. There's video of him. You could watch it on 60 Minutes now. We've been talking, 60 Minutes finally covered it. He said this woman had weaponized her car. Then video reveals he plows into her, jumps out of the car, says, do something, bitch, and then fires 5 shots. She miraculously survived. Hours later, Charles Exum, this ICE agent, texts his fellow ICE agents, 5 shots, 7 holes. Bragging, joking about it. These are the worst of the worst. You have the worst of the worst in the White House hiring the worst of the worst to work for ICE. The worst. As I said at the top of the show, it's not training as an ICE agent. That's not the problem. It's toilet training. These are men who were abused during their anal phase, when they were like, during their anal and oral phase, when they were like a year or 2 years old. Mommy and daddy shamed them, beat them. It's sad. It's tragic. We should give them help, not a gun or a badge. We should give them help. Illinois House Democrat Robin Kelly, she's a candidate for U.S. Senate. She's going for Dick Durbin's seat in Illinois. She began working the phone Saturday after the shooting to get more Democrats to sign onto her bill listing 3 articles of impeachment of Department of Homeland Security Chief Kristi Noem. So far, 100 House Democrats say they support impeaching Kristi Noem. You know, it's a very slim majority. I think Mike Johnson has like 1 vote to spare, 2 votes maybe. You got Massey; he's a Republican. They may impeach Kristi Noem. They may. With a government shutdown looming, the House earlier this week was able to pass a Department of Homeland Security funding package allocating $10 billion for ICE. One big beautiful bill passed on July 4th of last year gives ICE $170 some odd billion over the next 4 years. So we're talking about $10 billion. A lot of this is political theater, but the Democrats are right. They did try to block one big beautiful bill. J.D. Vance had to come in and break the tie in the Senate. It's not their fault that one big beautiful bill got passed and hands $170 billion to Trump's Gestapo, ICE. The budget they want to give $10 billion this year for ICE, in addition to the $170 billion over the next 4 years they get in the One Big Beautiful Bill supplemental. Okay, remember this? This was One Big Beautiful Bill. That was on July 4th. What we're talking now, and they have to do this by Friday or the government shuts down, the Republicans have to pass a $64.4 billion package to fund the Department of Homeland Security where ICE is nested. Of that $64.4 billion, ICE will get $10 billion. Again, let me just go over this because, I want to do a town hall where I teach civics. It's not anybody's fault that people don't understand this. It's a lot of this, they don't teach it in school, and then the news media speaks in a shorthand. The news media pretends you already know this stuff, so they speak in shorthand. What the news media is covering up is they don't know this stuff. So, again, fiscal year 2026 began on October 1st of 2025. That's a little confusing right there. The fiscal year always starts on October 1st of the year before. So we still don't have a finalized budget. Passage of the Department of Homeland Security bill is part of a $1.2 trillion spending package that is now before the Senate. And the government, we still don't have a budget. We're operating on a continuing resolution, which they call a CR, to push you away. They call it a CR. So you feel stupid for not understanding how this works, when in fact anybody who calls it a CR is stupid. They're trying to sound like they understand the machinations, the parliamentary rules of the House and Senate. They don't. Anytime somebody says CR instead of continuing resolution, don't trust them. Anyway, the the continuing resolution expires at the end of January. And then we have a government shutdown. So on the vote for this $64.4 billion Department of Homeland Security budget bill, which allocates $10 billion to ICE, The final tally on this vote was 220 to 207. It passed. Had those 7 Democrats voted against this, as House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries instructed them to do, it would have gone down to defeat. That's how narrow the margin is in the House. This is why we may see an impeachment, at least a vote on impeaching Kristi Noem. So the 7 Democrats who voted for funding ICE, they are Representative Henry Cuellar of Texas. Remember him? He was recently pardoned by Donald Trump. Cuellar was indicted by the Biden administration for taking bribes from a Mexican bank, and I believe it was an Azerbaijani bank. And Trump pardoned him, thinking, well, he'll come be a Republican. Then there was Vicente Gonzalez, also from Texas, Democrat. He voted for it. Representative Jared Golden of Maine, who I've had on this show, the great Howie Klein, said one of his biggest regrets was endorsing Jared Golden of Maine. Howie Klein. Read, all his stuff is over at Down with Tyranny. Also voting for that bill was Representative Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, Representative Lauren Gillen from New York, Don Davis of North Carolina, and Tom Suozzi of New York. Tom Suozzi has, what's his name's seat in How Quickly We Forget. I can't remember the name of my hero, the guy who went under 20 different names and stole money from, now I can't do the show, and I'm not going to look it up. I've had no sleep, and my memory goes when I've had no sleep. There was the Republican who ripped off all his donors to pay for Hermes scarves and Botox. Santos. George Santos? Is that his name? I'm not looking it up. I won't Google it, and I'm not looking at the chat room. I believe it was George Santos, right? I'm going to go with George Santos. I hope I can't do the show if I can't remember his name. I think it's George Santos. Well, he was a Republican. Tom Suozzi, Democrat, took a seat. So that's a purple district. So he voted, Suozzi voted for the bill. All 7 of those Democrats represent purple districts. Had they voted against the bill, it would have gone down. The Washington Post, where am I? Okay. This is live. All right. Everything is just shut down on me right here. As I'm trying to reboot this, you're listening to the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City, I think. We're about to get 16 inches. And I hear there's going to be some snow, too. Oh, did that work? All right, maybe it's coming. Maybe everything just crashed. We're in Apollo 13 moment here. All right. Do I have it? All right. Sorry. Okay. We're good. Sorry about that. We're a one, I don't want to say one man operation, but this is not going well. Okay. The Washington Post. Did I do it? We're back. Hi. The Washington Post. Yes, okay. The Washington Post reporting that the bill that did pass in the House, this funding bill, does cut ICE's enforcement and removal operations by $115 million. This is all theater. By the way, enforcement and removal operations. You sometimes see an ICE agent, and on their back it says ERO. That's not Jeff Lynne playing. I was going to say playing a country that in the Far East, but I don't know. I don't know if that's ERO. It's not right. Is it bad to say that certain countries say R instead of L? Anyway, ERO. I'm not talking about Jeff Lynne, the singer Jeff Lynne, and Electric Right Orchestra. That's ELO. I'm talking about ERO. You'll see some of these troglodytes, these trolls, these half men with bad toilet training who work for ICE. Sometimes on their back, instead of ICE, it says ERO. That means enforcement and removal operations. So this bill that passed in the House and looks like it's not going to pass in the Senate cuts $115 million from ERO. And it cuts the detention beds by 5,500. But as you can see from this chart, they're getting $170 billion from one big, beautiful bill. So it just means nothing cutting $115 million from the annual spending bill when you have one big, beautiful bill, the supplemental, giving ICE $170 billion over the next 4 years. And yes, I'm repeating myself because that's how you learn. So sometimes you have to repeat things over and over. One big, beautiful bill was a supplemental. It wasn't the annual budget bill. It was like a supplement to the budget bill. And some people say, why do you keep repeating yourself? Because some of us are not as smart as you prick. There are about 15 people who keep writing to me. Stop repeating yourself. I write back, you keep telling me to stop repeating myself. You stop repeating. I already got the message. Stop repeating myself. So you stop repeating yourself and by no longer telling me to be repeating myself. All right. I got to be honest with you. I have not been happy. I used to go to bed reading the news, and I end up staying awake for days. So I'm not happy. And when David Feldman isn't happy, Greg Bovino gets called short. That's the way it works. Seeing more and more videos of women calling Gregory Bovino short. You're making David Feldman happy, ladies. Call him short. All right, should I wrap it up? Okay, no, I'm going to keep going because me angry. I should go work for ICE. I'm stupid. Nobody will hire me. I'm ugly. I have low self-esteem. I have anger issues. Oh, I can read. I forgot. And I'm not impotent. I can't work for ICE. I'm not a racist. I'm not a misogynist. Although, given my past relationships, I have every reason to be. I was going through one of my divorces when Trump was running the first time. And I remember thinking, and I was voting for Hillary, and I thought, if I see why I must really love women, because I was going through a really bad divorce, and I still voted for Hillary, and I still knew I was cloudy with anger and rage, but I still voted for Hillary. But I got a hint of like, oh, okay, Trump is for men who can't satisfy women. And then they blame the women for being a-holes. I've lost everything. Is anybody still here? Hang on. All right. Hello? Are you still there? This is like a bad Twilight Zone episode. I feel like Rupert Pupkin just doing the show in my mother's basement. All right. God, I love Robert De Niro. I love The Irishman. Have you seen The Irishman? Martin Scorsese, Al Pacino, Ray Romano, Netflix. That has become my Casino, my Godfather, my Soprano. For some reason, I just watch The Irishman over and over. Joe Pesci. Joe Pesci. Just the greatest. Have you seen Judd Apatow's documentary on Mel Brooks? If you want to feel good, watch Judd's documentary about Mel Brooks. Amazing. Okay, we're back. According to... Are we back? Yes. Okay. According to Maria Sacchetti, she writes in the Washington Post, money in this bill that is probably going to die in the Senate, money has been allocated for body cams for ICE agents, but it is not mandatory for ICE agents to wear body cams. Well, come on. They can barely figure out how a gun works. How are they going to figure out a body cam? Jonathan Ross, the ICE agent, who is believed to be the one who put 4 holes into Renee Good on January 7th and allegedly then muttered, "effing bitch," he was not wearing a body cam at the time of the murder. Instead, he held a gun in one hand, a cell phone camera in the other, when he allegedly took Renee Good out. If he were really good, he'd have a Big Mac underneath his chin at the same time. That's what a real ICE agent does. Gun in one hand, cell phone in the other, and a Big Mac tucked neatly underneath his chin. But these guys, they haven't been trained properly, so you didn't know. Where are we? So, this is a photograph, by the way. We talked about how dangerous tear gas is. This is an ICE agent spraying tear gas directly into the face of a female protester. You know, they have ED pills for that. Who does that other than an ICE agent? The worst of the worst. The worst of the worst. Lisa Kaczynski writes for Politico, and she says the border issue isn't playing well with voters, and Democrats are picking up on this. She writes what I talked about at the top of the show, that 7 Democrats voting for the ICE funding package last week is significantly lower than the 42. I'm sorry, I said it was 40. My notes say it was 42 Democratic House members last year who voted for the Lake and Riley Act. So I stand corrected. I said 40. That was another border-sensitive bill, Lake and Riley, which calls for, it's passed, it's the law, calls for the mandatory detention by Department of Homeland Security of any immigrant who has been charged or arrested, not convicted. If you've been accused, charged. In other words, thanks to passage of Lake and Riley last year, ICE agents are free now to detain, arrest, and deport any immigrant who has simply been charged with a crime. That's what triggers an arrest. Read Lake and Riley. If an immigrant was ever charged, but those charges were dropped, the mere act of being charged meets a sufficient threshold for detention and deportation. 12 Senate Democrats last year voted in favor of this. Again, ICE may not be a lawless agency. If you read the Laken-Riley Act, which 42 Democratic House members voted for, if you read Brett Kavanaugh's concurring opinion in September, where he set up Kavanaugh stops, he said it's perfectly fine for ICE agents to detain and question someone based on their ethnic appearance. ICE may not be the lawless agency we like to flatter ourselves by accusing them of being. You know, it was Hitler never would have had the power had it not been for the Enabling Act. That's what they called it, the Enabling Act. And he was enabled by judges and politicians. 1933. So I don't hate Trump as much as I hate the enablers. I think the Enabling Act was passed in 1933. I think the Reichstag fire was in the summer of 33, maybe 34. Leave a comment. If when you're telling me to stop repeating myself, slip in what year the Enabling Act was passed. So remember, last year's One Big Beautiful Bill signed into law on July 4th. You're going to be following this. Friday, we're going to be coming up on a government shutdown. So you need to remember, One Big Beautiful Bill signed into law on July 4th, 2025. That's a separate funding bill for ICE that injects $170 billion over the next 4 years. This bill, we're only talking about $10 billion for ICE. Okay? Remember, One Big Beautiful Bill, 12,000 new agents, 135,000 detention beds. 90% of those detention beds will be run by Geo Group or Core Civic, the two largest for-profit ICE detention facilities in America. They donated millions to Donald Trump. They stand to earn billions from the $170 billion given to ICE over the next 4 years. So whatever minor cuts the Democrats are fighting for this week as we head towards a government shutdown, it's nothing compared to what we gave them, what we gave ICE in One Big Beautiful Bill. So we lost a 37-year-old ICU nurse, and they are continuing to blame the victim. They're blaming the victim. We haven't even seen what happens on Monday, what they start saying about an ICU nurse at the Veterans Hospital. You saw the videos. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. Leave a comment. Let me know if I got something wrong. Let me know. I'm going to try to do more shows. I apologize for the schedule being erratic, but I do my own research, and I issue corrections. I like to get my facts right, and I like to think, and let me know in the comments section, I like to think if today is Saturday, and I thought, I bet a lot of people don't want to hear about the shooting. They don't want to stare at the TV. And I like to think that if you come to me, I'll tell you everything we know without you having to stare at the TV to find out what happened. I hope I did that for you. But it takes time, and I like to get my facts correct. Thank you.